at this shit. I shaved like 12 hours ago. So the last system agnostic classes was Quarantine Edition, and this one still is, because everything in the world sucks. As for usual caveats, these classes are system agnostic. They are not meant to be the class that it is in whatever system that you like to play. They are just concepts with words. Historical preconceptions do come into play in today's episode, but as always, they are at best secondary, because this is for secondary worlds. Has nothing to do with the real world. Again, it's just concepts with words attached to them. And we're going to try to subvert all of this a little bit at the end. Today we are going to be talking about the most common real-world adventuring classes that appeared throughout history, which, for some reason, I have almost never seen in any role-playing game. Just maybe a handful of times in low fantasy settings, but that is it. Imagine being a person who reads a lot. That's basically what the scholar is. They are very well suited to be adventurers going out there in the world, because although certainly most of them will be hanging out in university towns acting as quest givers for adventurers, a lot of them probably are kind of daredevilishly and will have to go outside for their own research. They may be expert on ancient ruins, magical anomalies, foreign cultures, natural events, all kinds of stuff. And because they work in the field of knowledge, they will also be equipped with a bunch of general knowledge, random knowledge, trivia, just things that they know about the world that might come in useful. On their travels, they might even be able to make a little bit of extra coin by acting as teachers in rural communities. But here's the thing, even though, like, mechanically, it's not always as clear, knowledge is super powerful and so fucking useful in an adventuring party. I mean, knowledge is literally power, and having someone who specializes in that skill in pretty much every capacity will open up so many new options for every conceivable situation. The thing is, it can be very boring to play or to have in your party a character whose main ability is to provide exposition. I mean, we all have had this situation where we did a knowledge check and then the GM started to explain a lot of things to us that we as players obviously don't know, but that our characters know at that point, and then either we just repeat everything that was said to people at the table who have already heard that, like some kind of instant verbal exam, or we just say, I relay the information. The alternative to this is that basically you take a break so the GM can text you the things that you then read out loud. Which, like, I personally am an extremely slow texter. I hate texting in the best of situations. So neither of these things is any level of cool. They suck. Which is why the role of the scholar is often taken up by the wizard as a side thing, because the wizard gets to do cool wizard stuff also. So the idea there is basically that he probably read a lot of spell books, and they are books, and also there are books that have other information in them, and he just knows those things because that's how books work. Although, to be fair, this usually doesn't entail knowledge about the natural world, which usually falls within the purview of the ranger, because those wizard towers, there's not gonna be a lot of boars hanging out in them. Boars as in there's probably a lot of boring people in those towers. Although I personally have been able to break this mold a little bit, as one of my characters is a pyromancer, very much a wizard with a lot of arcane knowledge, but because he reads a lot, and so when he goes out into the natural world, he will recognize illustrations of things that he has seen in books as things that exist in the natural world also. I mean, he's also a professional mercenary, so it's not like the outdoors is foreign territory to him. But the scholar isn't necessarily a magical class. Don't get me wrong, they may have a solid grasp on the theory of magic and different magical phenomena just because they are educated. They might even be able to do some basic spellcraft, or maybe random assorted spellcraft, that is like component based, and also be knowledgeable about alchemy. Anything that really doesn't require their own innate magical ability to be used, they could probably have control of. Which, I have said this before and I will say it again, I despise with a burning passion any kind of thing where you have to track components in your inventory. I hate it as a player, I double hate it as a game master. I am one of those people who doesn't think inventory should really be a thing at all. Special items, you have those. That is the only inventory that is necessary, because everything else, the amount of flavor that it adds isn't worth the amount of clutter that it causes. Which, you know, for another similarity between the wizard and the scholar, to get back on topic here for a second, is that they might be able to identify the special items that are the only ones actually being worth tracking in your inventory. But for pragmatic game design reasons, a lot less than just realism, the scholar probably works best as a sort of prestige class that is tacked onto another character class, rather than a standalone thing. I mean, unless you have a player with an extremely good understanding of the game lore, whom the GM also trusts to be able to tell how much of a success degree of the role will give him how much knowledge about the world as a character. But that's such a specific scenario, we might as well discount it altogether. If you see a way of solving this and making the scholar an interesting standalone class, outside of low fantasy settings, please put it in the comments. I mean, come on, if there's one kind of person who dedicates their life to traveling overland over long periods of time and distances, basically hoboing for life, it's the pilgrim. Pilgrims are not so much a standalone profession as they are a mantle that people take on for a period of time in their life, though I'm sure that some have been able to make it work as a full-time thing. It's people who travel vast distances to see the landmarks and holy sites of their religion, or maybe their ideology, but usually, you know, within the frameworks of belief, it's religion. Which, if the scholar is a diet wizard, the pilgrim is cleric light. Or paladin light, really. Although, to be fair, given that in most systems that I have played, clerics are easily some of the most unstoppable murder machines in combat, there might be little functional difference. Pilgrims definitely have the favor of some kind of deity or deities. The difference being that they probably don't exactly know what that entails. A cleric will probably have, like, deep knowledge about the theology of the religion and know which kind of rituals have which specific effects and how to gain the favor of the deity and what to do and what the rules are and so on and so forth. Paladins also will have a lot of education on the formalized theology of whatever religion they follow. And they will definitely be explicitly trained in what exactly their divine favor allows them to do, what the limitations are, and how to most effectively use that stuff in a combat situation. Pilgrims are just people. Very often they're commoners. They don't know that Bublior, the father of light and ice which they worship, is the third cousin by marriage to Ambriga, the daughter of witchcraft and lemon juice. They don't need to know that shit. That's some footnote in some interpretation of some religious text. This guy is a blacksmith. He barely knows how to read. They do know what their deity is about, though, and they also probably can tell a little bit that they are smiling upon them. Now, the player might have detailed knowledge of what exactly it is their character can do because of the power that the deity gives them. However, the thing is here, maybe that opens up too much of a risk of metagaming. So a cool idea, I think, for this is that the GM should know the exact rules of what works for the pilgrim and what doesn't. And the player doesn't know this, so they have to keep track, as the character would, of what the rules are and figure them out for themselves. Alternatively, they could also be able to pick up different blessings depending on where they visit. As a matter of fact, maybe that's the whole point of the pilgrim class. Maybe they're not actually devoted to a particular deity. Maybe they are some kind of supernatural blessings magnet. So each deity will come with a catalog of blessings that the pilgrim will know and understand, and they will know which rituals to do for which deities to gain which blessings. However, they can only hold so many blessings at a time, and they also fade after a while. This would serve to balance the pilgrim's relative underpoweredness compared to clerics and paladins by adding a lot of utility. They'd be an extremely versatile class capable of adjusting adjusting to a lot of different situations given enough time to prepare. They'd be a Swiss Army knife cleric instead of a machine gun one. It could make for some extremely cynical characters too, where they just stop believing in the power of the gods because they can just take all of the blessings that other people worship their entire lives away for. Or, devotees to all gods. Maybe with a bit of a grandiose sense of self, because they do seem to be chosen by all deities, so it's reasonable to think that they themselves are somehow of divine blood. Depending on how common they are, there might be a lot of very powerful people, or even like the servants of deities or deities themselves, who want to maybe take a look at that person, potentially for some kind of vivisection type deal, or maybe just to destroy them. I mean, they kind of can steal from the gods, depending on how you interpret it, So this one genuinely baffles me. I mean, who best to travel over vast distances in order to plunder ancient tombs than the people who did this for a living historically? Yet I have never seen a single game that had the Explorer as its own distinct individual character class. Maybe this is to a degree because of the very nature of RPGs, where the characters usually are all explorers. But I feel like that doesn't really encapsulate the totality of what this class could be in terms of flavor. Explorers are people who go to faraway places to look what's there, and maybe establish a foothold for their home civilization. We have a certain vision of explorers being experts at wilderness survival and navigation, which is definitely true. They brave the dangers of the sweltering jungle, the eternal ice, and the scorching desert. They need to have good survival skills with a whole logistical element as well, because they are specialized in operating very far away from their native infrastructure, and sometimes setting up quite impressive operations. But they also have a huge social element that people often underestimate. This begins with being sociable and well connected enough back home to be able to secure funding for your probably very expensive expeditions. Like, this stuff costs a lot of money, so you have to be an excellent salesman. But also, in those faraway lands, you will often have to interact with cultures that are very, very foreign to your own, with their own customs and traditions and etiquettes. It doesn't matter where you're from for that, it's about the being far awayness. The place that you are from would be a place that they would send explorers to. And you don't just need to interact with them, you have to do this diplomatically, maybe even to establish trade relations. I mean, you could also be the show up and smash everything conquistador style of explorer, but I doubt that a lot of players would actually have fun playing that, which besides, even if that were the case, you would still have to be sociable and have a understanding for this foreign culture in order to exploit their internal political struggles. I mean, that is how the Spanish destroyed the Aztecs. They showed up, they learned about the problems that they had politically, their regional geopolitics, and then they found the weak points and pushed on them with guns, with which the Spaniards, despite their really quite inferior numbers, were able to take control of the area. And then you also need to understand the goods and treasures that you are, shall we say, procuring. I mean, at that point, you are basically a social ranger with extensive economic skills. And if you specialize on the dungeon delving kind of exploration, you would be a huge boon to have in any kind of adventuring party because of your sheer knowledge about those dungeons, probably. And if beyond that, you are a kind of adventuring factotum, I mean, Jesus Christ. But here, as with the scholar, the problem of potentially becoming just a kind of exposition character arises. It's so weird that all of these are both too specific and too general to be useful in most RPG situations. Like, aside from the one interpretation of the Pilgrim that takes different blessings, I feel like most of these aren't good in anything that isn't like a low fantasy campaign, where they could obviously be tremendous. That being said, let's try subverting some of this. So all of these are classes which by their very nature travel a lot. So how about they don't. There is a lot to do in your local area, especially if it's a well-developed local area with a complex ecosystem that provides a lot of niches for a lot of different people. I personally am a huge fan of stay-at-home campaigns with minimal travel. Scholars can exist in their natural habitat here even, being professors at the university while occasionally hanging out with the adventuring party in order to adventure with them. And of course, the most useful of these will be scholars of the local area. I mean, tour guides really, let's be honest, are kind of scholars. Pilgrims, of course, are the ones most defined out of existence by this. I mean, what are they gonna do? Are they gonna just walk around the different temples in town all day? That's what they're gonna pilgrimize to? But in this context, the alternative blessing magnet kind of pilgrim works really well. It's like some kind of roguish cleric. Especially when the religious powers that be catch on to this cleric sort of just getting all of the blessings that they want to be controlling, some interesting things are going to happen. And though explorers might seem like the least portable class of all of these, I would argue that the opposite is the case. I mean, forget that any interesting region will have all these cool ruins and a lot of like dungeon-esque type situations speckled throughout. Have you heard of urban exploration? There is just so many interesting locations, especially in big cities, and information about them is worth cash money. Even the skill set is similar. You need to be able to traverse terrain quickly, know all the shortcuts, all of the ways of surviving in that environment. You need to understand the underlying principles of the area that you inhabit, and you need to be able to properly communicate and establish rapport with various different subcultures therein. Plus, you get to do parkour. Thank you very much for watching this episode of System Agnostic Classes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on PayPal or Subscribestar, maybe buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, I hope this gave you at least a little bit of insight into the general workings of character classes overall, because all of these can fit into a lot of character classes that we already have. And maybe I am actually curious how you're going to make the scholar work. Or if you have techniques to avoid the scenarios that I described, I was going to say below, but it's really earlier. I'd be very, very interested to know. And in that spirit, see you around, cunts.